Fishing trips anywhere, anytime. FishingBooker.com.
Midway USA has traditional cap and ball revolvers and accessories, along with the most modern inline muzzle-loading rifles. Cowboy action shooters and other fans of traditional black powder shooting will find a great selection of fully functioning replica Old West Army and Navy revolvers, plus all the necessary materials to help them go bang, like percussion caps, loaders, patches and wads, and round balls too. We carry a full line of inline rifles, as well as 209 primers, black powder substitutes, and bullets and sabots. For just about everything for black powder, shop MidwayUSA.com.
At Midway USA, we put customers first. The Nitro Express shipping system is icing on the cake. It was a big investment of time and money to take super fast, low-cost shipping to a whole new level. The Nitro Express helps ensure same-day shipping and low shipping cost. We hope you enjoy the Nitro Express. We built it just for you. For just about everything for the outdoors, go to MidwayUSA.com.
I'm Larry Potterfield with Midway USA. Thanks for your business.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of CastingAcross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. In episode 345, we're going to be talking about fishing mountain lakes. Fishing mountain lakes, or as we call them here in New England, mountain ponds. And before I get to that, I just want to say something about a magazine that I am usually critical of. Well, not critical of the magazine, critical of the cover choices. How about that? So Trout magazine is the official publication of Trout Unlimited. I've been a member of TU for years and years and years, and while I don't agree with everything they do, I do believe that by and large they do good work in conservation, education, and specifically youth engagement. I truly have to contribute a significant amount of my angling and conservation appreciation to the work of both local, regional, as well as national Trout Unlimited initiatives. So, all that said, I have mentioned from time to time how I am not a huge fan of some of the design choices that they use on the covers of Trout magazine, and then of the wall calendar, which has gotten ridiculously small and on really crummy paper. But I don't use a wall calendar, so I can't complain too much about that. But all that to say, this June 25, so like the summer issue of Trout magazine, has an absolutely phenomenal photograph of the tributary to the Beaverhead in Montana. It's just a wonderful photograph that captures a meandering stream, the riparian zone around it, and the surrounding grasslands, with a little bit of the horizon off in the distance. It's a spectacular picture. It's the kind of picture that makes me smile and makes me want to open a magazine. And I know that you can't judge a book by its cover, but at the same time, when you're only putting out 4 magazines a year, you want it to be good. So all that to say, I think it was a really good magazine cover, and because I've been critical of pictures of somebody's face on the cover of Trout magazine, for example, or a picture of just somebody fishing on the cover of Trout magazine, I thought I would give credit where credit is due. So anyway, back to the topic at hand. What do I mean by mountain trout lakes? Well, if you are an angler who likes to go to the backcountry, now whether that's on the East Coast, where we have a limited amount of high mountain lakes, and those are mostly contained in New England and down into New York. And I guess there's some I fished in Pennsylvania, but it's mostly up in this northeastern part of the country. But if you go out west, then really everywhere, once you hit the Rockies, all the way out to the west coast, you're going to find high mountain lakes, which is a really exciting thing for a few reasons. One, it gives diversity of habitat for the trout, and two, it gives diversity of angling opportunities. So I'll just make it very particular to my circumstances. When I go fly fishing up in the White Mountains here in New Hampshire, for example, I can hike up a river and I can cast and catch fish and pursue those trout as I go up that creek higher and higher. And then every once in a while, either because of it being naturally occurring with a capital N or naturally occurring because beavers have done it, there will be a pond, and those ponds will range from less than an acre to multiple acres, and there are trout in them. Here we have brook trout that are swimming in these nice little high mountain lakes. and it gives you a different opportunity to pursue these fish. But one of the things that you will find very, very quickly is that once you decode the cipher for catching trout on mountain streams, which isn't particularly difficult, it doesn't mean that all of that knowledge, all those experiences, and even those skills and flies are going to necessarily translate into fishing on the ponds that are either feed or are what are fed by the streams that you are fishing. So that is to say, the ponds that are right next to the creeks are not going to fish the same way. They might have more fish, they might have less fish, they might have bigger fish, and they probably aren't going to have smaller fish, but they are definitely going to fish differently. This was something that I kind of learned the hard way when I first moved to New England, and I said, "Oh, this is fantastic! I haven't fished a high mountain lake on the East Coast, and so I'm going to hike up this stream, catching fish all day long on little attractor dries, probably a humpy because it is the best dry fly out there." And then I get to the pond. I'm thinking, this is fantastic. I get to bomb out these long casts. I'm not just flipping my fly and doing bow and arrow casts. I get to cast out, wade, knee deep out into this pond and this muck and this, mud, and expecting moose to pop out and seeing black bears. It's just picturesque, New England scene. And I start making cast after cast after cast, and nothing's rising. And I don't even see any action. And so I try my hardest, and I keep casting, and nothing happens. Well, there was no fish rising on that pond. Although the fish in the creek were absolutely hammering my dry fly, the fish in the pond wanted nothing to do with it. And this is the first time I realized that you can have effectively the same watershed, but just because one is a still water and the fish in that still water are used to a different kind of life and a different forage source than the stream-born fish are, it's going to require a completely different approach. So as I waded out of that pond and I started finding leeches on my legs, I realized, hey, I think I know what I need to do. And so on went a streamer and on went the fish. So it is really a very different approach. Now, that's not to say that there's going to be times where there's bugs hatching. And I think this is one of the big differences is when there's a hatch going on, those bugs are probably going to find their way into both places, particularly with mayflies and even some caddisflies. They're going to be hatching in both the the streams as well as the ponds, particularly where they are very, very close to one another. But because the substrate, the surface of the bottom of both of those bodies of water are of different composition, generally speaking, there's going to be more silt and mud in the still water than there is going to be in the moving water. You are going to find different insects because different insects have different tolerances and needs for how they live. So the first thing to do, and again, we're kind of going from the end of the process back to the beginning here, is you want to figure out what is in that water. And the best way to do it is to grab a handful of gravel, grab a rock, even grab some mud. If you can't see something buzzing around the surface, see what is under the water. And I'll keep it very, very brief because this is, of course, something that is completely different in the specifics and the particular flies, no matter where you fish in a region and certainly across the country. But there's three things I like to look at. Actually, let's say four. The first one is terrestrials. Just like anywhere else, when terrestrials are out mid to late summer, even into early fall, and that breeze blows, those fish are going to key in on those bugs. And this is a fantastic way to chase fish on still waters and high mountain lakes with a dry fly. And you can, it's whatever's up in there. Is it ants? Is it grasshoppers? Is it whatever's buzzing around in the trees when it gets blown on the surface of the water? Those fish are going to key in on it. And then, of course, you have the dry flies that if you can see what's hatching, that you can fish. But then one of the most productive things to key in on is midges. Particularly in still water, there's going to be midges everywhere all the time. And so I like to have zebra midges. I like to have brassies. I like to have copper johns. Even the European buzzers. Those are great flies for fishing still water. And these are the kind of insects that these fish are used to seeing all the time. But of course, you can fish these flies in tandem. Strike indicators are all fine and good, but when you're fishing a still water, I always like to fish a hopper dropper of some sort. It can be a big stimulator. It can be even a big bushy Adams or parachute Adams, if you are noticing more mayflies that are out there. But to have a good, solid dry fly you can see that functions as an indicator, and then pattern your midge pattern that is going to drop off of it to be in the right depth, to be in the feeding lane of those cruising trout. Now you've given yourself two opportunities, because it very well may be that even if there's not a lot of bugs buzzing around, that plop of that dry fly on the surface is going to be what keys them in. And bare minimum, the pop of that dry fly gives you a chance for a fish, but they may look up or over at it, and then they see that nice little brassy suspended, a little serendipity or an RS2 or something like that, that is just coming down right into their face. And I would say then the next thing is, although those midges are very, very valuable and you shouldn't be fishing mountain lakes without them, then definitely have your traditional pheasant tails and hare's ears as well. I like to kind of have them extra buggy. And now again, this is assuming you have a smaller selection of flies. So if I'm going to fish a hare's ear or a pheasant tail, as opposed to something like a brassy or a zebra midge, I'm going to make sure those traditional nymphs, the pheasant tail, the hare's ear, is going to be nice and buggy, just to give me more options. Chances are, if I'm high up in the mountains, I'm not going to be carrying many fly boxes, so I like every fly to play a particular role. So we're talking about surface, both terrestrials and then macrovertebrate insects that are coming out of the water, and then we have our nymphs and then streamers. So there are not going to be, under normal circumstances, lots of bait fish in these ponds. That's not to say that they aren't going to be there, but leeches are going to be a really, really good option. So I like to make sure that I am pulling along some, black woolly buggers or marabou leeches. There's not going to be as many sculpins. There could be some other, juvenile fish if you have a piscivorous species that you're targeting, depending on where you're fishing. So you can have a generic streamer, and with that, I always like to consider, fish that fly like the natural is going to be presenting itself to those fish. So if you have that little black streamer and there's no bait fish that you can see, then you're going to want the thing to bounce off the bottom, kind of like a leech does, and you want to fish it along the shallows. So that's a very general mountain lake fly box that we're talking about. I mean, a couple of terrestrials, especially for the few months out of the year when you can fish those, an assortment of dry flies, either if you know what insects are in there or some attractor dries, and then a couple of more buggy traditional nymphs, and then some slimmer midge-style nymphs that you can fish as a dropper, and then also some streamers, particularly if you know where the drop-offs are, and if you know that there are maybe bait fish in that water body, or if you are going to targeting fish using leeches, which there almost are everywhere. And that brings up technique. Now, you can't, just like fishing for bass, you can catch fish by walking up to a pond, just casting to the middle and reeling in. Same things with fishing for trout in mountain lakes. You can catch trout by walking up, making a cast in the middle of the lake, and letting it sit there if you're fishing something like a dry or a dry with a dropper, or casting out in the middle and stripping in with a streamer. But the better thing to do, if you're not seeing cruising trout, which is always something that you should stop and pay attention to. When you walk up to that pond, I know it is so very tempting to just start making casts, but just watch. Are fish cruising? Give it a second. Does the fish have a little bit of a circuit that it's making? They're not that smart. They're just kind of going in a pattern. Pay attention, because that might be what you can key in on. But the next thing is to, like you're fishing a warm water pond, look for cover, look for structure. Fish will hold near logs. Fish will hold where they can be in the shade, where they can be camouflaged. Fish are going to hold by drop-offs. Drop-offs are often where they cruise, because that gives them an opportunity to ambush. It also gives them an opportunity to escape, because there are all sorts of predatory birds and other critters that want to eat them. So even if they are a large fish in a pond, they also are paying attention to things that are outside that pond that are potentially going to eat them. So pay attention to drop-offs. I will say something that's great, especially for larger ponds, but I would say any pond in general, if you have the opportunity, is if you can get onto your state's conservation department's website or fish and game department's website, if they have maps of these ponds, that's going to give you a leg up on where those drop-offs are. Because if it is a particularly tannic body of water, or if it's just not something you can easily detect from the shoreline, it's going to be helpful to know that there's, one side of the lake, when you cast, you're going to be casting into shallow water, even if you cast 50, 60 feet out. And the other end, you're going to maybe, find a part of that pond where if you cast only 15, 20 feet out, it's going to drop down 5 or 10 feet. So having that information, being equipped with that information is really, really helpful if you're going and fishing new spots. So drop-offs, ledges, structure cover. They can be rocks, it could be down trees, it could be a log extending out into the lake from a tree that's fallen down, any sort of vegetation. All those things are things to target and to key in on if you're not seeing fish cruise or fish rise. Which brings me to one of the most underappreciated pieces of gear for this kind of fishing. Well, that's a bit wrong. People who do this kind of fishing, they have this. A lot of people who are just giving it a shot don't have this, and that's why it seems like such a struggle. Even if you are having to hike into the backcountry, having a belly boat or a float tube is invaluable for this kind of fishing if you want to kind of take it seriously. And this is why you might run into people who say, I absolutely love fishing mountain ponds. I love fishing mountain lakes. It's because they have a watercraft that gets them out to the places where you can't necessarily cast and you can't necessarily fish. Especially if you are like well below tree line, it's really hard to cast and cast well on a lot of these mountain ponds when you are having to skirt the shoreline brush, because there's no maintenance. There's no, there may be game trails, there may be blowdowns, but by and large, you're at the disposal of where there are breaks in the trees. And a lot of times that's going to be in places where maybe there's an inlet or an outlet. And so it's shallower. You're not necessarily near a drop off. So you miss out on that great opportunity. But if you can find a belly boat, you can hike up with that thing on your back, or you can hike up with it deflated and bring that foot pump and pump it up once you get to the pond. That's going to give you an option to move around that pond at your, complete leisure and make all the casts you want to make, which is important again, because as great as it is to cast from the shore, your approach and your presentation to fish that are cruising along the shore is much more stealthy, and you have many more options if you're casting from the inside of the water body out towards the bank as opposed from the shore into the lake. So a belly boat, a float tube is a really, really valuable tool if you find yourself doing this kind of fishing a lot. And as I talked about, I think last week on the podcast, it's the same thing is true for fishing for panfish. So they are small money, and if you are capable, if you have the means, then they are a great thing to have. Now, as far as other gear, it really depends on your water body. It depends on where you're going to fish, and also, are you going to be combining fishing a pond with fishing a stream? So I'm thinking of one little pond that I really like to fish up in New Hampshire. And I can't fish the stream that is between the parking lot and the pond well with anything longer than 8 feet. So a rod that's over 8 feet long, no matter what weight it is just too unwieldy. But once I get to the pond, I could fish a 10-foot rod. It really doesn't matter, especially if I'm making roll casts and some other casts. It's nice to have that extra length. So I have to find a compromise. I have to shoot for like that 8-foot rod. It's right at the upper end of manageable length for the stream, but it's probably a little bit too short for the pond. So if you're trying to fish both, you want to kind of have your cake and eat it too. Either A, you carry 2 rods, or you find something that's going to split the difference. But usually on that open water, having more rod is better. I like to fish a rod that has a little bit of a faster tip, so I can make those long casts with less false casts when I'm on still water, because I never know what's going to be behind me. I also never know kind of how stealthy I need to be in my approach, so less false casts is always better in my opinion. And so I like to, if I can get away with fishing that 9-foot rod, then I will more than happily bring that 9-foot rod up to those ponds. Reel is essentially inconsequential. And as far as line weight goes, I like to, keep it basically the same thing I'm going to be fishing in those streams. I'm not going to be fishing a leech that is any larger than some of the streamers I'm fishing in the stream. So, 2 is at the bottom of my weight tolerance, because my ones and my zeros are really struggle with throwing any sort of streamer that has any sort of weight, either wraps around the body or on the head. And so a 2, but preferably a 3 or a 4. And I think a 4 is going to do anything and everything you need to make those casts. I will say, as we kind of work back towards the terminal end of the tackle situation, having a line that can turn over a long leader and being able to cast a long leader is also a really valuable thing in this situation, because if you have fish that are cruising and you have to make casts with pinpoint accuracy, you want to give yourself a little bit of a buffer. And so the longer the leader and the more delicate the tippet that you can cast, and really, we could be talking about 12, 14 plus foot leaders here. Being able to cast those and cast those well matters. And so having that faster tip that isn't necessarily stiff can really, really be helpful when you are fishing high mountain trout ponds or lakes. So again, that is just a very, very quick primer. I think, if you were to take one thing away from what I've said in the last 20 minutes, it's that you can't think about ponds up in the mountains the same way that you think about the streams that feed them and that they feed. They are two very, very different fisheries. There are times, like I said, when you can walk from one to the other, keep this exact same rod, line, leader, and fly and catch fish. But there's a lot of times where you are going to have to change things up differently. And this is one of the cool things too, is that you might even see that benefit in the fish that you catch, where those fish look different because the substrate of the bottom is different. They're hanging out in different places. They're eating different foods. And there's enough of a difference in maybe a macroinvertebrate-based diet for the stream-born trout versus maybe a leech diet from the pond-born trout, that they're going to look different, even though they're maybe only a few feet away from each other. And you also never know. Some of these ponds hold other species of fish, which is really cool. And you just see a lot more, I think, when you are fishing in a pond, when you're up in the mountains. This is where I've run into more wildlife, because I'm being really quiet on one side of this pond, and then a really far distance away, a quarter mile away, there's a fox that's doing its own thing that isn't really paying attention to me. You don't really have that same focus when you're in the bottom of a valley up in the mountains, focusing on this little bit of water that's in front of you in a stream. So there's so many benefits to it. Fish safely, pay attention, know what you're doing. When you're up in those ponds and a storm comes in, get off the water as quick as you can. The same thing is true of a stream, but you feel even more exposed, and you truly are more exposed if you're out on the open water when you are fishing that mountain lake. And remember, if you go wading in them, make sure you check yourself for leeches. This week on castingacross.com. First article is called The Good Fly Fishing Guide Life. This is a reworked article from 2017. And it talks about my fly fishing guiding at present. And it's a reworking again of an article that was my fly fishing guiding at present back then. So you have to check out that article, The Good Fly Fishing Guide Life, to see what I mean. Wednesday's article was another installment in my YouTube book review series. It's called 3 Books You Need to Fly Fish the Mid-Atlantic. 3 books you need to fly fish the Mid-Atlantic. And so I talk about the 3 books that you need, in my opinion, to fly fish Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. There are so many books that cover Pennsylvania, and a good number of books that cover Virginia, and a couple of books that cover Maryland, and I pick my favorite for each state. This week's recommendation on the podcast is something I've recommended in the past, but it is the time of year when we're thinking about wet wading, at least if you're listening to this in the summer, which is when it's being recorded. And I really think that the best wet wading shoe I've ever owned and worn is the Astral TR1 mesh, and it has been recently reworked to be the 2.0. So Astral is not a fly fishing company. It's not a fishing company. It's primarily a kayak gear company, a paddling company. But these shoes are spectacular. They are really lightweight. The grip is just spectacular. They ventilate well, both of air, and then they push water out so that you're not standing in soggy shoes. And I like wearing them barefoot, and I like wearing them with socks. So again, I haven't worn the 2.0, but the original TR1 mesh was a fantastic shoe. If you are in the market for an all-around nice lightweight sneaker, this is worth checking out. It's also something, like I said, if you are a wet waiter and you want something that is designed with you in mind, this is a great shoe. They have other options too if you want like a high top or something like that, but it's going to be the same price as some of the big fly fishing companies' wet wading shoes, but this looks like a normal shoe, so it has that going for it. And I've had 2 pair of Astrals, different styles, absolutely love them. They are, like I said, I think the best things that you can find when it comes to wet wading shoes. If you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to ask. Matthew at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in Spotify and iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
This episode is brought to you by Boat Trader, America's largest boating marketplace. Whether you're buying, selling, or upgrading, the Boat Trader app makes it easy. With the biggest selection of new and used boats from dealers and private sellers. Browse, compare, and even apply for financing, all in one place. Download the Boat Trader app and start your search today.
Want to plan your next fishing trip without the hassle? FishingBooker.com is the best way to find and book a fishing charter anywhere in the world. Whether you're chasing trophy fish or just looking for a family day on the water, Fishing Booker makes it simple, fast, and secure. With thousands of experienced guides, verified reviews, and 24/7 customer support, Fishing Booker takes the guesswork out of planning. Visit FishingBooker.com and book your trip today. Fishing Booker. Fishing trips made easy.